My daughter destroyed my $50 million company for revenge, until she discovered I'd been watching. The rain drummed against my home office windows as I spread the quarterly reports across my mahogany desk. 25 years of building Harrison Tech Solutions, and the numbers still gave me a thrill. $50 million in company valuation, up from the garage startup I'd launched in 1999, with nothing but determination and a maxed-out credit card. I adjusted my reading glasses and ran my finger down the revenue columns. The growth was steady, consistent, exactly what investors love to see. But something nagged at me. Small discrepancies in the system performance metrics that didn't add up. "Dad, you're still doing this the hard way." I looked up to find Jessica standing in my doorway, her designer blazer perfectly pressed despite working a 12-hour day. At 32, my daughter had inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and my stubborn streak. As Chief Technology Officer, she'd transformed our little software company into a major player in cybersecurity solutions. "What hard way?" I asked, gesturing to the printed reports scattered across my desk. She laughed, that tinkling sound that reminded me so much of her mother. "Paper reports, Dad. Everything's digital now. Your paper trails are just clutter." I held up a highlighted section. "This clutter shows our server response times dropped 15% last month. The digital dashboard says everything's normal." Jess walked over and glanced at the papers with barely concealed impatience. "Those are legacy system fluctuations. Nothing to worry about. The new monitoring protocols I installed filter out the noise." "Since when do we filter out performance data?" "Since we started serving enterprise clients who don't want to see every tiny hiccup." She perched on the edge of my desk, her expression softening. "Dad, I know you built this company from nothing. I know every line of code feels personal to you. But we're not a garage startup anymore. We need to trust modern systems." I studied her face, looking for the little girl who used to help me debug programs on weekends. "I do trust modern systems. I just like having backup records." "Backup records that contradict our current reporting systems?" Her voice carried a note of concern. "Dad, that could confuse investors. Make them think we don't have our act together." The comment stung more than it should have. "I've been running this company since before you could spell algorithm, Jess." "I know, and you've done an amazing job. But times change. The board expects sophisticated reporting, not handwritten notes and printed spreadsheets." She was right, of course. The board meetings had become increasingly technical, filled with venture capital terminology and growth projections that made my head spin. But something about dismissing these discrepancies felt wrong. "Tell me about the late-night maintenance you've been doing," I said, consulting my handwritten log. 3 times this month, system updates between midnight and 4 a.m. Jess's expression flickered for just a moment. "Security patches. I schedule them during off hours to minimize disruption. Standard protocol." "Security patches that require 18 hours to implement?" "Complex patches, Dad. Cybersecurity isn't like the old days when you could just restart the server and call it fixed." I nodded slowly, though my military training had taught me to trust my instincts. 20 years in the Air Force before starting this company had given me a nose for when something didn't smell right. "Maybe you're right," I said, closing the printed reports. "Maybe I'm getting too old for this business." Relief washed across her features. "You're not too old. You're just set in your ways, which isn't necessarily bad. Your old-school approach to client relationships is why we have such loyalty. But the technical side needs to evolve." "Speaking of evolution, how's the Morrison account progressing?" "Excellent. They're impressed with our new security protocols. I think we'll close the renewal next week." I made a note in my handwritten planner, ignoring her small smile at my analog methods. "Morrison's been with us since 2018. Good people. The best. They trust us completely, never question our technical recommendations. Something in her tone made me look up, but her expression was innocuous. Trust is everything in this business. Absolutely. Which is why we can't afford to look amateurish with conflicting reports and outdated monitoring systems. After she left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the photographs that told the story of Harrison Tech. Jess at 8, helping me install our first server. Jess at 16, coding her first commercial application. Jess at 25, accepting the CTO position with tears in her eyes. She's the future of this company, I'd told my wife Sarah before cancer took her 5 years ago. Smarter than I ever was. But smart people sometimes made the biggest mistakes, especially when they thought they were the smartest person in the room. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with my handwritten observations about the company's technical evolution. Call it paranoia or prudence, but I'd been documenting everything since the day we went public. If there was one thing the Air Force had taught me, it was the value of redundant systems. When lives depended on your equipment, you never relied on a single point of failure. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, System discrepancies. Investigate independently. 25 years of building something from nothing had taught me to trust my instincts. And right now, my instincts were screaming that something was very wrong at Harrison Tech Solutions. 3 days of investigation had turned my home office into a war room. Physical files spread across every surface, cross-referenced with printed screenshots I'd taken during late-night server access sessions. What I'd discovered made my stomach turn. The numbers didn't lie, even when the digital systems tried to hide them. I pulled out the Morrison Industries file, one of our oldest clients. According to Jess's quarterly reports, they were thriving under our new security protocols. According to my physical backup files, Morrison had submitted 3 formal complaints about system vulnerabilities in the past 2 months. Complaints that had been deleted from our customer service database. My hands trembled as I compared the records. 23 years of marriage to Sarah had taught me to recognize deception, and these discrepancies screamed betrayal. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't stop digging. Every client file revealed the same pattern. Digital records showed satisfied customers and flawless system performance. Physical records told a different story of mounting problems and growing concerns. At 2:47 a.m., I used my founder-level admin access to log into the server core. Jess thought she'd restricted my permissions last year during the security upgrade, but I'd built this system. I knew every backdoor and failsafe. The deleted communication logs painted a horrifying picture. Client emails expressing frustration about security breaches. Technical reports documenting system vulnerabilities that our software should have prevented. Support tickets that had been marked as resolved without any actual resolution. But the smoking gun was buried in a hidden directory labeled Backup Archive 2023. Encrypted files that required my old master password to access. Files that Jess didn't know existed. I opened the first document and felt my world collapse. TechCorp Acquisition Proposal, Phase 1 Implementation, dated 18 months ago. The document outlined a systematic plan to degrade Harrison Tech's reputation and technical performance, making the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover at below market value. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Sabotage client security systems to create dissatisfaction. Delete complaint records to hide the damage from the board. Manipulate performance reports to make the company appear more stable than reality. Create the perfect storm for a desperate sale to TechCorp Industries, our biggest competitor. And at the bottom of every document, Jessica Harrison's digital signature. I scrolled through 18 months of betrayal, each file more damning than the last. communication logs with Tech Corp executives, financial projections showing Jess receiving a $5 million payout, plus an executive position post-acquisition. Technical specifications for the malware she'd been installing during her security updates. My daughter hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been systematically destroying everything I'd built, poisoning client relationships, and preparing to sell the corpse to our enemies. The office door creaked, and I spun around, heart hammering. Empty hallway. Just the old house settling. But paranoia crept up my spine. How long had this conspiracy been active? Who else knew? I printed everything, old habits dying hard. Physical evidence couldn't be remotely deleted or digitally altered. The printer hummed for 47 minutes, producing a paper trail that would survive any cyber attack. By sunrise, I had proof of corporate espionage, fraud, and systematic sabotage. Evidence that would destroy Jess's career and put her in federal prison for decades. The daughter I'd raised, trained, and trusted with my life's work had been planning my professional murder for over a year. But why? The question tormented me as I organized the evidence into neat folders. I'd given her everything. Full access to company operations, competitive salary, clear succession planning. When I retired, Harrison Tech would have been hers completely, unless she couldn't wait for natural succession, unless $5 million in immediate gratification outweighed patient inheritance. The phone rang at 7:15 a.m. Jess's name on the caller ID made my chest tighten. "Morning, Dad. Early day at the office?" I looked around at the evidence scattered across my desk. Couldn't sleep. You know how it is. Actually, I wanted to discuss something important. The Tech Corp executives reached out yesterday. They're interested in a partnership discussion. The audacity took my breath away. She was using me to set up the very meeting that would destroy us. Partnership? I kept my voice neutral. What kind of partnership? Strategic alliance initially. But Dad, between you and me, they hinted at acquisition possibilities. The valuation could be incredible. How incredible? Preliminary estimates suggest 15 to 20 million. Cash deal. We could both retire comfortably. 15 million for a company worth 50 million. Fire sale pricing for assets she deliberately damaged. That's interesting timing, I said carefully. Just when we're having those system performance issues. A pause. Dad, those issues are exactly why this opportunity makes sense. TechCorp has the infrastructure to stabilize our technical problems while preserving our client relationships. The lie slipped off her tongue like silk. What do you think we should do? Meet with them. Hear their proposal. Dad, this could solve all our problems. After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone. My daughter was actively scheduling the meeting where she planned to sell my company for parts while positioning herself as the technical expert who could help with the transition. 25 years of building Harrison Tech, and she was going to auction it off like surplus equipment. I walked to my safe and pulled out the Colt 45 I'd carried during my Air Force years. Not for violence, but for the psychological weight of holding something real and permanent in a world gone digital and deceptive. The gun felt solid, honest, unlike everything else in my life. By noon, I had a plan. If Jess wanted to play corporate warfare, I'd show her what a real military strategist could accomplish. She taught me that trust was a weakness. Now I'd teach her that underestimating your opponent was fatal. The war for Harrison Tech had begun, and she had no idea she'd just declared battle against someone who'd spent 20 years learning how to win. The next week, I became the confused old man Jess expected me to be. Every morning, I shuffled into the office with printed reports clutched in my hands, asking basic questions about systems I'd designed myself. Jess, this firewall configuration looks different, I said during Monday's staff meeting, squinting at a printout like I couldn't understand it. Dad, we upgraded the security protocols last month. Remember? Her voice carried patient condescension for the benefit of our department heads. Of course. But why are the authentication logs showing failed access attempts from our own IP range? Mike Peterson, our head of operations, leaned forward with concern. Failed attempts from internal IPs? That could indicate a security breach. Jess waved dismissively. False positives from the legacy monitoring system. Dad's still using outdated analysis tools. I nodded slowly, playing confused. Maybe I should stick to the client relationship side of things. That's probably best, Jess agreed, and I caught the flash of satisfaction in her eyes. Behind my performance, I was building the most sophisticated digital trap Harrison Tech had ever constructed. 25 years of system administration had taught me every vulnerability in our network. More importantly, I knew things about our architecture that Jess had never learned. During her late-night maintenance sessions, while she thought she was covering her tracks, I was documenting everything from a ghost partition she didn't know existed. Every deleted file, every altered log, every communication with TechCorp executives was automatically copied to secure storage that only I could access. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed to catch her in active betrayal, force her to reveal the full scope of her conspiracy. Wednesday evening, I created the perfect bait, fake technical specifications for a revolutionary encryption algorithm worth $10 million in government contracts. I buried the false information in a directory labeled Project Blackbird Declassified and waited. The hook was irresistible. Jess had always been ambitious, but she'd never had access to our military-grade projects. The promise of technology that could revolutionize cybersecurity would be too tempting to ignore. Thursday morning, my ghost monitoring system recorded her accessing the fake files at 3:17 a.m. By 3:45 a.m., she was uploading the specifications to an encrypted email account registered to a shell company in Delaware. Fridays, communication logs showed her forwarding the false data to someone at TechCorp with the subject line, Acquisition Timeline Acceleration. The trap was working perfectly. Dad, we need to talk. Jess appeared in my office doorway, her expression more serious than usual. What's on your mind? She closed the door and sat across from my desk. I've been thinking about our financial position. The system maintenance costs are getting expensive, and some of our older clients are questioning renewal terms. Each word was calculated manipulation, building toward the predetermined conclusion. Which clients? Morrison Industries expressed concerns about our security architecture. They're evaluating alternatives. The lie came so easily. Morrison had actually increased their contract by 30% last month, praising our reliability. That's concerning, I said, maintaining my confused father act. It gets worse. I intercepted some communications between our competitors. There are rumors about Harrison Tech having technical difficulties. If word spreads, we could lose major accounts. What do you suggest? The TechCorp partnership offer is looking more attractive. They could stabilize our reputation while providing capital for infrastructure upgrades. I pretended to consider this. What kind of timeline are we talking about? They want to expedite the process. Initial meetings next week, due diligence completed within 30 days. Dad, if we're going to do this, we need to move fast before our market position deteriorates further. The urgency was artificial, designed to prevent careful analysis of TechCorp's below-market offer. Schedule the meeting, I said finally. But I want to review all technical assessments beforehand. Relief washed across her features. Of course. I'll prepare comprehensive documentation. After she left, I pulled up the real Morrison Industries account. Their latest evaluation report praised Harrison Tech's exceptional security protocols and proactive threat response. They'd also referred 3 new clients in the past month. The disconnect between reality and Jess's narrative was so extreme, it bordered on delusional. She'd been living in her fabricated crisis for so long, she'd started believing her own lies. My computer chimed with a new message. Internal communication from the TechCorp acquisition team, accidentally copied to my administrative account due to a routing error Jess had overlooked. Phase 2 implementation proceeding ahead of schedule. Target company's technical leadership has successfully created acquisition pressure through managed performance degradation. Recommend acceleration of formal offer to capitalize on manufactured crisis. Financial projections confirm acquisition cost below 30% of actual asset value. They were calling it managed performance degradation. Corporate doublespeak for systematic sabotage. I printed the email and added it to my evidence file. Now thick, enough to destroy both Jess and TechCorp in federal court. But prison wasn't enough. I wanted something more elegant, more poetic. I wanted her to experience the same betrayal she'd inflicted on me, the same moment of realization that everything she'd trusted was built on lies. Saturday morning, I began constructing the most sophisticated deception of my career. False financial records showing Harrison Tech in desperate condition. Fake technical reports documenting system failures that would justify a fire sale. Fabricated client communications expressing dissatisfaction and contract cancellations. Every lie Jess had told about our company's condition, I made temporarily true in a parallel database she could access but not control. When she logged in Monday morning, she'd see exactly the crisis she'd been describing to TechCorp. A company on the verge of collapse, desperate for any acquisition offer. The irony was perfect. She'd spent 18 months creating fictional problems to justify selling Harrison Tech. Now I give her the fictional crisis she'd always wanted, right up until the moment I revealed it was all performance art. By Sunday evening, my trap was complete. TechCorp thought they were buying damaged goods at bargain prices. Jess thought she was orchestrating a brilliant deception. And I knew exactly how both parties would react when reality replaced their carefully constructed illusions. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. In 48 hours, my daughter would walk into a boardroom expecting to execute the perfect betrayal, only to discover she'd been outmaneuvered by the old man she'd been trying to destroy. Military strategy had taught me that the best victories came from letting your enemies defeat themselves. Jess was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more focused. I adjusted my tie in the bathroom mirror, noting how much older I looked since discovering Jess's betrayal. The past 2 weeks had carved new lines around my eyes, but they'd also brought clarity I hadn't possessed in years. The Harrison Tech boardroom buzzed with nervous energy when I arrived at 9:45 a.m. Our 5 board members had assembled around the polished conference table. Dr. Patricia Stevens, our longest-serving member and family friend. Michael Turner, the company lawyer who'd helped us navigate our IPO. Sandra Welsh, representing our venture capital partners. Tom Bradley, our financial advisor. And David Kim, our strategic planning consultant. Jess stood at the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the presentation system with the confident efficiency of someone who believed they held all the cards. She dressed for success in a Navy power suit that projected authority and competence. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice carrying the practiced tone of a seasoned executive. "Thank you for attending this emergency session. I know the short notice was unusual, but we're facing a critical situation that requires immediate action." I took my seat at the head of the table, maintaining the slightly confused expression I'd perfected over the past week. "Emergency session? Jess, what's this about?" Her smile was patient, almost pitying. "Dad, we discussed this yesterday. The TechCorp acquisition proposal, remember?" Of course. I waved vaguely. But emergency session seems a bit dramatic. Dr. Stevens leaned forward with concern. "Bill, what exactly is the nature of this emergency?" Jess clicked her remote, and the first slide appeared on the wall-mounted screen. Harrison Tech is experiencing critical system failures that threaten our entire client base. The presentation was masterful in its deception. Charts showing declining performance metrics, fabricated client complaints, and technical reports documenting catastrophic security breaches. Every lie she'd been telling TechCorp for 18 months, now packaged for board consumption. As you can see, Jess continued, our server response times have degraded by 40% over the past 6 months. We've documented 17 major security incidents, including 3 data breaches that exposed client information. Michael Turner's face went pale. 17 incidents? Why wasn't the board informed? My father insisted on handling these issues internally, Jess replied smoothly. Unfortunately, his outdated management approach has prevented us from implementing necessary upgrades. I felt the eyes of the board turning toward me with growing concern. I thought we were managing the problems, I said weakly. Dad, you've been in denial about the severity of our technical debt. These systems you designed 20 years ago can't handle modern threat vectors. Sandra Welsh pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. If these numbers are accurate, we're looking at potential lawsuits, regulatory fines, complete loss of client confidence. Which brings us to our solution, Jess said, advancing to the next slide. TechCorp Industries has offered to acquire Harrison Tech for $15 million, cash transaction, closing within 30 days. The boardroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Tom Bradley was the first to speak. $15 million? Bill, what was our last valuation? I pretended to fumble with my notes. I thought we were worth more than that. $48 million 6 months ago, Michael Turner confirmed, consulting his legal files. This represents a 70% discount. Jess nodded gravely. Which reflects our deteriorated market position. TechCorp is essentially buying our damaged reputation along with our assets. They're taking significant risk. What about remediation? Dr. Stevens asked. Surely we could fix these problems rather than selling at fire sale prices. The technical challenges are beyond our current capabilities, Jess replied. We'd need to hire additional staff, upgrade infrastructure, potentially face months of system downtime. The cost could exceed $20 million with no guarantee of success. I watched my daughter systematically dismantle everything I'd built, using fabricated evidence to justify selling the company to our competitors. Her performance was flawless, confident, utterly convincing. There's another factor, she continued, her voice dropping to convey reluctance. My father's judgment has become increasingly unreliable. Yesterday, he asked me to explain email protocols he designed himself. The cognitive decline is affecting his decision-making capability. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Not content with destroying the company, she was destroying my reputation, my competence, my very identity as the founder of Harrison Tech. Sandra Welsh shifted uncomfortably. Jess, that's a serious allegation. I don't make it lightly. But the board needs to understand why these problems weren't addressed earlier. Dad's been covering up issues he doesn't understand, making decisions based on outdated assumptions. Michael Turner looked directly at me. Bill, how do you respond to these concerns? This was the moment, the culmination of 2 weeks of careful planning, 18 months of documented betrayal, and 25 years of building something worth destroying. I could feel Jess's confidence radiating across the room as she prepared for my confused, defensive response. Instead, I smiled. I respond by saying my daughter is absolutely right about one thing, I said, standing slowly and walking to my briefcase. Someone in this room has been making decisions based on completely false assumptions. I opened the case and pulled out my laptop, the same battered machine Jess had been mocking for years. But it isn't me. Her expression flickered for the first time, uncertainty replacing confidence. Jess has presented compelling evidence of Harrison Tech's decline, I continued, connecting my laptop to the presentation system. Now let me show you what I've really been working on these past 2 weeks. The screen filled with my meticulously organized evidence files. What you're about to see is 18 months of systematic corporate sabotage, industrial espionage, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Jess's face went white. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm talking about Project Blackbird, TechCorp's acquisition strategy, and your $5 million payout for destroying everything your mother and I built. The boardroom fell silent except for the hum of the presentation system. In that moment, I knew the war was won. The first slide filled the screen with devastating clarity. A screenshot of Jess's encrypted communication with TechCorp executives, time-stamped and authenticated. Her own words condemning her in corporate black and white. Target acquisition proceeding ahead of schedule. Performance degradation protocols successfully implemented. Recommend acceleration of hostile takeover, while father remains unaware of systematic sabotage. The boardroom silence was absolute. Dr. Stevens stared at the screen with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Michael Turner's pen had frozen halfway through taking notes. "This isn't possible," Jess whispered, but her voice cracked with the recognition of her own words. I advanced to the next slide. Financial records showing her Delaware shell company receiving payments from TechCorp totaling $850,000 over 18 months. "Consulting fees," I said quietly, "for services rendered in corporate espionage." Sandra Welsh leaned forward, studying the payment records. "These transactions predate any official acquisition discussions by more than a year." "Because there were no acquisition discussions," I replied. "There was a systematic plan to destroy Harrison Tech's value, forcing a desperate sale at below-market prices." The next slide showed Jess's late-night system access logs, correlated with client security breaches that had been blamed on legacy system failures. "Every security incident your daughter reported was deliberately caused during her maintenance sessions. She wasn't fixing vulnerabilities, she was creating them." Tom Bradley's face had gone pale. "The Morrison Industries breach last quarter?" "Caused by malware Jessica installed in their security protocol update." I clicked to the technical analysis. "She then deleted their complaint logs and altered our performance reports to hide the damage." "Dad, this is fabricated evidence," Jess said, desperation creeping into her voice. "You're confused. These documents are authenticated with military-grade digital forensics," I interrupted. "Every file includes metadata proving authenticity, timeline verification, and source confirmation." I advanced through 18 months of documented betrayal. Each slide revealed another layer of the conspiracy. Client data sold to competitors, proprietary algorithms leaked to TechCorp, financial reports manipulated to hide the company's actual growth. "Our real quarterly performance shows 37% revenue increase," I said, displaying the genuine financial data. "Harrison Tech isn't failing. It's thriving despite systematic sabotage attempts." Dr. Stevens found her voice first. "Jessica, is this true?" "I was trying to save the company," Jess replied, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Dad's management style was outdated. His refusal to modernize was going to destroy everything we'd built." "So you decided to destroy it first?" Michael Turner's voice carried the sharp edge of legal outrage. "I was preventing a slower death. TechCorp's offer represents real value in a changing market." "TechCorp's offer represents theft," I said, advancing to the final group of slides. "Their internal documents confirm Harrison Tech's actual valuation at $62 million. They plan to acquire us for $15 million, a 75% discount achieved through industrial espionage." The screen filled with TechCorp's confidential acquisition analysis, including projected profits from integrating our client base and technology portfolio. $3 billion in projected revenue over 5 years, I read aloud, generated from assets they planned to purchase for $15 million. Sandra Welsh was furiously taking notes. How did you obtain TechCorp's internal documents? Jessica's encryption protocols had a weakness she didn't know about. When she transmitted our proprietary data to TechCorp, she accidentally created a backdoor that allowed me to access their entire acquisition strategy. It wasn't entirely true. I'd used far more sophisticated methods involving federal cybersecurity contacts from my Air Force days. But the explanation was simpler for civilian understanding. The beautiful irony, I continued, is that her attempts to steal our technology gave me complete access to theirs. Jess slumped in her chair, the weight of exposure finally crushing her composure. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The board meetings, the investor calls, watching you struggle with technology you didn't comprehend. I comprehended enough to catch you, I replied quietly. What happens now? Dr. Stevens asked, her voice heavy with the implications. Now we call the FBI, Michael Turner said, already reaching for his phone. Corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy to commit fraud. We're looking at federal felonies. Wait, Jess said suddenly, panic replacing resignation. Dad, please, we can fix this. I'll resign from TechCorp, return the money, sign whatever agreements you want. Return what money? Sandra Welsh demanded. The $5 million completion bonus, I said, displaying the final contract. Jessica's compensation for successfully delivering Harrison Tech to TechCorp at fire sale prices. The number hung in the air like an accusation. $5 million, more than most people earned in a lifetime, as payment for destroying her father's legacy. 25 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 25 years of building this company, teaching you everything I knew, preparing you to lead it into the future. And you sold it all for money. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears finally breaking through her professional composure. I'm so sorry, Dad. But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't repair 18 months of systematic betrayal. Sorry didn't restore the trust that had been the foundation of our relationship. Dr. Stevens, I said, turning to address the board formally, I'm recommending we restructure Harrison Tech as an employee-owned cooperative. Everyone who helped build this company should share in its success. What about succession planning? Tom Bradley asked. The employees will elect their own leadership. Democracy instead of dynasty. And TechCorp, Michael Turner inquired, will face federal investigation for conspiracy to commit industrial espionage. Their acquisition strategy documents provide evidence of systematic corporate theft spanning multiple companies. I looked at my daughter one final time, seeing the stranger she'd become beneath the facade of the child I'd raised. Jessica, you have two choices. Cooperate fully with federal investigators and accept responsibility for your actions, or face prosecution without family support. She nodded slowly, defeat written across her features. I'll cooperate. Then we're done here. As the board members filed out, discussing legal procedures and damage control, I remained alone with my laptop and the evidence that had saved Harrison Tech. Outside the conference room windows, Seattle's skyline stretched toward the horizon, unchanged by the drama that had unfolded in this corporate boardroom. 25 years of building something meaningful, nearly destroyed by the person I'd trusted most. But trust, like technology, could be rebuilt with better security protocols and clearer authentication systems. Some legacies couldn't be stolen, only earned through character, integrity, and the wisdom to recognize that the greatest inheritance isn't money, but the principles that guide how we treat others. Harrison Tech would survive and thrive, protected by people who understood that real value couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or acquisition prices, but in the relationships built on genuine trust and mutual respect.